That was absolutely incredible, and I love Irshad's focus on getting upstream and going to our kids. I work a lot with kids in our state, especially those most vulnerable kids. We have kids. We have kids that fundamentally disagree with us. And having those really difficult conversations is critical. And so I'm so excited to announce this panel talking about how we get to engage with our kids and how we can get upstream of some of this polarization. First of all, I want to welcome Michelle Sobel. She is the president of Unify America, a cross-partisan nonprofit organization on a mission to replace political fighting with collaborative problem solving. Before she joined Unify America, Michelle founded and built 2 digital health companies. Prior to that, Michelle worked as the creative director for Jellyvision, the interactive entertainment company, and creator of You Don't Know Jack, game series. She started her career as a Hollywood film editor. Michelle lives with her family in Denver and serves on the board of directors of Colorado Public Radio. She graduated from Brown University. Welcome, we'd love to have Michelle. Come on up. Next, we have David McCullough. He's the CEO of American Exchange Project. David has a BA in American Studies from Yale and an MPhil in Economic and Social History from the University of Cambridge. And in the summer of 2016, inspired by a Yale course on poverty's effects on education, David, a rising senior, drove 7,100 miles across the country. He spent 2 months in 3 towns that were very different from the Boston suburb that he grew up in. The lessons he learned led him to find a social innovation that could bring America closer together in towns rich and poor, liberal and conservative, urban, suburban, and rural across the country. Young people were voicing a common complaint: I feel like I'm growing up in a bubble, and I've never seen life on the outside. So the American Exchange Project was born. So welcome, David. Thank you. And then finally, we have Sarah Igo, the Dean of Strategic Innovations and Andrew Jackson Chair in American History at Vanderbilt University. She also has a BA from Harvard and a PhD from Princeton, and is the Andrew Jackson Chair of the American History and Dean of Strategic Initiatives in the College of Arts and Science in Vanderbilt University. She teaches and writes about modern U.S. intellectual, cultural, legal history with interests in the production of knowledge and the politics of data, human sciences, and the history of privacy and the public sphere. She is the author of an award-winning The Known Citizen, A History of Privacy in Modern America and the Average American, surveys citizens and the making of the mass public, and co-author of the leading U.S. history textbook, The American Promise. At Vanderbilt, she has led a major curricular reform and co-directs the Open Dialogue Visiting Fellows and Student Ambassador Program. Welcome, Sarah. Thank you. Should I be here or there? You go there and I'll go here. I'm really excited to have this conversation about, mostly about our young people. It's a powerful thing that I've seen. They're just more moldable. They are creating their identities right now. And as we talk about, sometimes we want that political identity to be like the lowest on the list, in my view. We like that they have these identities, and they're just starting to explore these identities. And so I think it's such a great time to think about this. Michelle, you're running this Unify America, and your website says Unify America creates interactive experiences to help people bust out of their bubbles, build civic muscles, and work together to tackle our country's biggest challenges. Let's talk about how that works and what you're seeing.
Okay, well, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, First Lady Cox and Governor Cox and the NGA for inviting me on this panel with David and Sarah. This is a real privilege to be here today. So we're nonpartisan, and we have a simple goal. We give Americans practice disagreeing better and bridging across this difference and finding common ground in a virtual setting, and we use tech to do this for 2 reasons. One, it helps connect us across big geographic divides, and it lets us do this at massive scale. So our program, the Unified Challenge College Bowl, is a large-scale intercollegiate program where we pair students into one-on-one conversations across ideological difference as much as they know they have. Yes. And we do this nationwide. So to date, and it's been about 3 years since we started, over 14,000 students across 206 colleges, Abby's looking at me, across 40 states have engaged in the program. They do this as part of their coursework. So they're not volunteering, they're voluntolding. And this is key because these are not typically students who are hand raisers. They're probably not protesting today. They're not joining clubs or college debates. They're just trying to get their degree. And so this might be a student who's studying nursing or nutrition or aerospace engineering, and the professor assigns this program to them. And so they have to engage. And I have a video. Should I show it now, or should we wait?
Sure. Yeah.
This is just some students reflecting on their experience. So Jay, can you please cue the video?
Do you go to college in Chicago?
Yeah, I'm at UIC.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So cool.
Before taking the challenge, I was very nervous about sharing political beliefs with my partner.
I would definitely say that I was a little nervous.
Like a little nervous.
I felt really nervous.
I did feel nervous.
I didn't know what the questions were going to be like or who I was going to get paired with.
I was very skeptical because I've never really been given an opportunity to talk about my political beliefs in a space before.
I wasn't sure how to approach things or if it was going to be really combative and argumentative, but it wasn't.
It was really cool to just sit down and have a conversation solely dedicated to understanding another person's point of view and sharing my own.
You can understand that all opinions are valued and they matter, and so just because it isn't something you necessarily agree on, you can still understand where it's coming from.
What we were talking about was how the news wants to polarize us and make people seem like you're on two different sides, two different camps in the extremes, and that's not the case at all.
If more open conversations are had, then it'd be more so that we would realize that we agree with a lot of our neighbors or classmates.
I feel like together, even across political boundaries, we're still a united America.
And they're not, they're engaging to start with some icebreakers. And one of the questions I really like is, tell the other person who would be proud that you were doing this today. And they talk a little bit about their families. And then they get into the topics. There are 16 topics, and it covers mental health, immigration, the economy, guns, abortion, and free speech on campus, among others. The really easy stuff. And we're not expecting them to study for this. They sort of just talk about it on a very high level and talk about goals and interact with each other. And then we ask them to take each other's perspectives. So I'll stop there, but that's the work that we're doing.
It's beautiful, and again, so needed. And I love what they said about we're actually not that far apart. And it's the science that we're seeing is that perception gap. Mm-hmm. They've been told, on social media or their preferred, news program or whatever, that the other side is clear over here. Yeah. And I think I love those interactions. Sarah, you've been doing an amazing thing at Vanderbilt that we're really excited to hear about, Dialogue Vanderbilt. We have had conversations with our president from the University of Utah who told me a couple of years ago that they were seeing that
I think this is part of the issue that we're seeing with our young people during the pandemic and the lead up to it, and the loneliness and the lack of social interactions because of screens and all the things. He's seeing that we are bringing in that the kids starting college now, or at least, you know, when he did this survey a couple of years ago, we're coming in with 15,000, these are 18-year-olds, 15,000 fewer social interactions, which he said was equal to about 3 years. So think about why these kids are struggling, because you're sending the equivalent of an emotionally mature 15-year-old to college. Now, I've had 15-year-olds.
Me too.
Yeah, right? And so talk a little bit about how, you know, that Dialogue Vanderbilt and the things that you're doing there is bridging that divide and that belonging and that the isolation that we're seeing.
Sure. Well, let me just echo Michelle's thanks to the hosts and my co-panelists here who are doing really amazing work. I'd say, you know, one thing that makes working within a university different than in these other organizations is we do have, you know, something of a captive population. We've got them for 4 years. We have structures. We have classrooms. And in a way, I think universities and colleges have not really been using them to think about these problems until very recently. And there are a whole bunch of reasons for that. I'm a historian, and you know, I'm tempted to say, you know, it's partly the loss of faculty thinking that there are things in common that students need to know and to do. But I'll say, to this question of social interactions, it's not really just our students. Our students are learning from the public world they inhabit, and also seeing a lot of, you know, pretty unpleasant exchanges and people unwilling to listen to one another. So. We both have a kind of platform for doing really interesting work, I think, in colleges and universities, but I wouldn't say that the problems are unique to students or to universities that we're seeing. So what can we do in these places? One thing that Vanderbilt is trying to do, and I think we're not alone in this, but I think we've come up with some really unique programs, is to think about a multi-pronged approach to these problems of students not being able in a classroom setting or in the community at large to freely express their ideas and their opinions. Of course, their opinions as college students should be information. They shouldn't already have to know what they are and have them firmly rooted, yet they believe they're both supposed to know what they think, and they're very nervous about upsetting other people or not knowing what they should think. So there are lots of hurdles to overcome. What Dialogue Vanderbilt is trying to do is to use, as I said, a multi-pronged approach to model reasonable, reasoned, though still impassioned discussions by bringing fellows to campus to tell students how they came to their ideas about affirmative action or about abortion or what have you, and to not just put those people on a stage, but to bring them into small group discussions with students where they really model changing their mind, how they came to a view, listening to students who disagree with them and so forth. So that's one piece. It's not the only piece, but I think it's an important one. Other work that we're doing is with students in classrooms, training our faculty to have and not fear, as faculty like students do, having really controversial and difficult conversations in class, giving them a toolkit for how you set norms in classrooms, how you create rules of engagement from the very first moment that allow students to begin to trust that what is said in class won't be taken outside of class, that people are supposed to stumble and make mistakes and learn from them. That is what education is, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise. That they won't be vilified for comments they make. So trying to provide that kind of training to faculty, but also to really communicate to the students from the first moment they arrive on campus in their orientation sessions, and also in new curricular programs that we're introducing, especially in the first year. But then there are other things too. A number of people have mentioned habits, our last speaker, and practice. We are creating new places where students can go to learn how to argue better, disagree better with one another, an advocacy, dialogue, and debate lab, for example, where they can go in to just sort of try out arguments with other neutral partners, for example. And our debate team and our debate coaches have been thinking about debate as one model, but dialogue as another, and trying to think about the various different kinds of modes and platforms through which we learn to think together, even if we think differently. And I guess the last thing I'd say is that we have found students themselves to be critical thought partners in all of this, that we can't imagine that we have figured all of this out either. That's part of intellectual humility, and we certainly haven't, as our campuses have shown, I think, this last year. But that we need to really be able to hear what students are thinking. We need to actually ask them to be partners with us in designing programs and asking them what they need. And they have told us very plainly, fewer people talking at us, more opportunities to interact and engage. And so we've tried to be faithful to that feedback that they've given to faculty who like to talk. And to really give them positions within the university where they feel that they can be represented and heard. So we've created just this year, after our first year really of Dialogue Vanderbilt, a pretty big student advisory board, about 40 students who will help advise us on all aspects of these programs. And the last thing I'll say is that universities are a kind of microcosm of our democracy. Both the university and our democracy depend on the free and really spirited exchange of ideas. And I think universities are and need to really step up to help train these students and model these practices, for the good of us all, and need to be free to do that in all kinds of ways.
Cool. Thank you. It's amazing what's happening, and we do have to teach those skills. They are so critically important. Now, David, I recently saw a video of some Utah students in your work, and I have to say, I'm just so proud of this. From my own experience, I was sitting here thinking about you and I, your experience living in a Boston suburb. My experience was growing up on a 600-acre ranch in rural Utah. So you and I came from very different places. You and I have had great conversations, and I love hearing from you and your experiences. You and I have gotten proximate and had conversations about where we came from and our work. You're creating that for all these other high school students, which I think is beautiful. So talk a little bit about the things you're doing with our high school students.
Well, 600-acre farm in rural Utah, lucky you.
I know.
I'm
very lucky. I didn't think it at the time when I was doing all the chores and feeding cows and all that kind of stuff. But
very cool. Well, first, let me echo my thanks to the NGA, Governor Cox, First Lady, for having me today, and to the two of you. I'm convinced Gordon's dog stepped on his keyboard, and that put me on the panel here, because I have no idea how you feel with it. But you're doing incredible work. Thank you. Yes, so at AEP, we send high school students on a free week-long trip to an American town that is totally different from the one that they're growing up in. In short, it's an exchange program, but instead of going to France or China or Japan, you go to a very different part of the country. Dodge City, Kansas to Palo Alto, California, Boston to rural Texas, Sudbury, Massachusetts to a 600-acre farm in Utah, and I'll help you milk the cows that morning.
Let's do it.
The theory is that our beliefs, political and otherwise, are really shaped by our lived experiences, and that those experiences are shaped by the circumstances or conditions in which we live. And for kids, they didn't get to pick those conditions. So if we're going to be able to talk to each other about the things we believe in, we need to know a little bit more about our lived experiences. And in the spirit of showing and not telling, I did bring with me a video. I'd love to bring you all on an AP trip. I encourage you to come. Instead, I brought a video with me today. If we could show that, it tells about the program.
Does Shay have it?
You could also do an interpretive act.
I know.
Be that dancer out there alone, David.
I say maybe while they're doing that, let's just talk a little bit more about it. But while they're getting
yes. So basically, what happens is we partner with high schools across the country. We have 65 schools currently. As of this July, we'll have had over 1,000 students go through the program, and we hire the beloved local high school teacher to run the program. They're one part Peter Pan, one part Tom Brady. And they recruit high school students, recruit host families, and plan itineraries that are, at a quick glance, all about fun, but are really about cultural immersion, getting to know hometowns, connecting with local professionals, and volunteering. We do a day of service on all of our exchanges, both as a way to give back to a community, but also to experience firsthand an issue that you might have never considered. What happens to a Boston kid when they rebuild a home built by a hurricane that their friend once lived in and contemplate the resilience and the tie to a place when they know what's coming up the Gulf every year and we'll build our homes anyway and live here anyway. The connection that forms with students is enormous. And really what we're trying to do is build social capital between groups of kids as a way that they can have friends. And so suddenly as they move forward in life and they see words or stories or that wacky uncle at Thanksgiving goes off on Republicans or poor people or rich people or whatever, they're not associating that with vague ideas informed by stereotypes and tarnished by prejudices, but they're thinking of people they actually know, real friends. I find it shocking that 3/4 of white Americans don't have a friend who's not white. 40% of Americans have never met a farmer. 54% of young people have never seen a cow in real life. How many of us eat beef?
How did they get that stat?
Travel and Leisure magazine, actually, interestingly enough. Yeah, they did a poll of Gen Z. And the more I meet kids, the more you see that's true. 1/3 of our kids have never been on an airplane. I think we're shunning each other because we don't know each other. And AEP is a social innovation designed to help young people get to know each other.
Yeah.
Do we have a video yet?
Looks like there's issues. So we'll just keep going. Hopefully we'll get the video because I think that's really powerful. I love to see the students' experiences. I love the idea of high school, and again, we're getting proximate. It's so important. I've learned more and changed myself because of these important conversations. Recently, we've all kind of watched in the news and seen on our own, in each of our states, I'm sure, these protests on college campuses. And Sarah, so you're probably right in it. You're getting these, talk maybe a little bit about what you're seeing and how, how can we fix this? How are you doing it on these college campuses where we're seeing protests and kind of violence and between, sort of First Amendment rights and talking about that and having kids express their views, but also, what is the law? What can you do? What can you not do? There's a lot of conflict there.
Yes, it's very complex, and I would say in my experience, my years as a faculty member, this has probably been one of the trickiest kinds of issues to navigate because the opponents or the people on the different sides don't line up in ways that everybody expects, and these are very deep and passionate commitments that students often have, but without often knowing a larger context themselves. So I guess I approach all of these issues with education at the forefront. As someone who's in an educational institution who thinks evidence is really important, who thinks context is very important, and also who believes that students are not and should not be fully formed ideologues at 18 and 19 years old. So I think our approach at Vanderbilt has been to try to educate students actually about the kinds of parameters of free speech and about, yes, the law around, place, time, and manner, for example, but also to remember that they are students and they are learning and that they will stumble and make mistakes, as I said earlier. The other thing that I think we have to keep in mind about the campus protests is that the platforms on which students are operating and our news are operating are different than the relations on campus. And one of the things that has struck me, again as a historian, is that there are these analogies to earlier divestment protests, anti-apartheid protests, the Vietnam War, and so forth. What's different today is that students are both protesting in real time and they're protesting for an audience, a kind of mediated audience. And I think that's made everything much more difficult. So some of what I think we need to teach and we need to learn, and I mean this for faculty and administrators too, is that the social media world that we're seeing is not necessarily the same as what's actually going on these campuses. That's a context too that we need to understand. So I'm a real advocate for, and I don't think anybody would disagree, that listening on the part of administration and on the part of faculty is really important to hear students. We had I won't say too many details about this, but we had a group on our campus who felt they really were not being heard, that they were not represented by the administration in terms of the speakers being brought in and so forth. And simply sitting down with them in a couple of meetings and listening to them actually more or less resolved the situation. And I think we as adults are sometimes afraid too of sitting down and just having the conversation and just being a sympathetic ear. And we underestimate how powerful it is to be listened to, especially a student by an administrator, and how far really that can go. It won't solve everything, nor can it. This is a very complex world we're all living in.
Right.
But it really, to show that one can listen, one can empathize, even if ultimately you can't give in to a particular demand, is so critical to how these incidents unfold.
Yeah, I love that. One of my favorite authors is Adam Grant, and just the idea of thinking like a scientist. Michelle, I've been thinking about this as it relates to, I mean, what your work is, you know, crossing those divides, pulling people together. How do you get these students or these young adults to think about, you know, that it's okay to be wrong? That's okay to change your mind? I mean, how do we start to have those conversations where, I mean, because it feels like today, if you're wrong, that's like the worst thing in the world. Like, to be wrong is horrible. So you don't want to be wrong, you have to be right. Talk about how we kind of get over that. How do we think like a scientist, like Adam Grant says?
Yeah, no, I love Adam Grant as well. You know, we really believe, we're at earshot, that practice, practice, practice.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're envisioning that every college student in America participates in the civic gym, and that you go to the gym to work out your civic muscles, and you practice this over and over again. It's the doing, and I think you become less afraid. So you first connect, what David French was saying, affection, connection. I'm seeing you as a human, I'm seeing you as complex, I'm learning new perspectives, I'm not falling apart, and that I can stay curious. Staying curious is the only instruction we give the students. That's it.
Yeah.
Stay curious, stay open. And so I think it's just doing it. It's the doing.
Yeah, no, that's powerful. David, I'm sitting here, you have to have these amazing stories. I want to hear some of the stories from these kids that they're experiencing. I have to say, like, I remember getting on a bus, you know, again, a little farm girl, and then my mom sent me on a like leadership trip with 4-H to California with 50 people I had never met in my life, young people like me from all walks of life. And I walked on that bus scared to death. I walked off the bus later, you know, a week later, sobbing because I have to leave my friends. And this is back before, you know, Facebook, so we didn't keep track of them. But you've got to have some incredible stories like that where people are just changed because of these experiences.
Yeah, the waterworks tend to come out on these experiences a lot. I mean, you know, we've all traveled before, and you know when you travel, the horizon you're looking at goes from this to like this, and that changes your life forever. There are a number of stories. I mean, first my own, when I went on that road trip, I got married 8 months ago, and you know,
congratulations.
Thank you. You know, in the front row of our wedding, and their bolo ties and cowboy hats were 4 of my pals from Cotulla, Texas. Now I've got a bunch of in-laws wanting to go to the Wild Hog Cook-Off in March. Two really popped to mind. We had a boy named ZJ from Albany, California. Albany is a neighborhood of Berkeley, California. It's as blue gets in this country. And ZJ graduated from the public high school there and was going to matriculate to the Culinary Institute of America up on the Hudson River in New York State. We sent ZJ to a town of 2,000 people, Flandreau, South Dakota.
Bigger than our hometown.
There you go. Yeah, big city. 2 hours north of Sioux Falls, right on the border of a reservation there. And CJ had a blast of a time. And part of the Culinary Institute's mission is that students are required after their freshman year to work as a line cook at a restaurant anywhere in the world as part of the curriculum. And so CJ, when it was time to pick his restaurant, said no thank you. Because it's such an elite school, these kids have entree to you name the restaurant. He said no thank you to Paris and London and New York, and went right back to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where he worked in a restaurant there. Another story is a boy named Matthew, who grew up in a very rough neighborhood of the city of Stamford, Connecticut, southwestern Connecticut. So rough that his mother wouldn't let him out of the house after 7 o'clock at night. We will have sent over 1,000 kids through the program this year, and I think for a lot of kids growing up in low-income neighborhoods, that's actually not an uncommon story. So Matthew, you talk about the lack of social connections on average students have. Matthew was at the very low end of that spectrum, just a massively unexposed kid. And we put him on his first airplane ride. He was so scared we had to fly one of our employees to New York to meet Matthew at the airport. She held his hand as the plane was taking off. And I wish I could put it up here, but you should see the look on his face when he's 5,000 feet above Manhattan, looking down from a vantage point he's never seen. And the metaphor of all that is the essence of the program. So Matthew went to Kilgore, Texas, and one of our donors there walks the kids into Cavender's, which is like the cowboy outfit, a real cowboy, no offense to Nashville cowboy outfitters, right? And says, get whatever you want. And so Matthew got jeans and boots and a belt and hat, and he became like Tex. He became John Wayne, not Matthew. Again, metaphor for the whole experience. Next day he goes and works on a ranch, and he's up working with cattle. He's never seen a cow in his life before. All the experiences that you just talked about. Fast forward 8 months, and Matthew's in the hospital dealing with serious mental health issues. And he's not, in lieu of talking to a therapist, Matthew actually elected to call every day the rancher that he worked for in Kilgore, Texas, to talk him through his period, because that man allowed Matthew to get out of the world that was giving him trouble, find who he was, form his identity, and then try to go back and deal with the world, and think of what our friends have done for us in our own lives, and that's what that rancher did. I also see that the video's cute.
Yeah, let's do the video.
Be still my beating heart.
We all crave connection. We all need to know we belong. This way, we learn from each other, support one another, and work together to fix our shared problems.
But divisions have defined the moment. The differences that could be our strength now polarize us.
Too often, though, we shun each other because we don't know each other. We need to rediscover our shared humanity, and young people can lead the way.
What if students from Palo Alto and the Bronx got to taste the best barbecue in Kilgore, Texas?
What if teenagers from Jackson, Mississippi and Jackson, Georgia could summit a Rocky Mountain or brave the Salmon River?
Or if kids from Sheridan, Wyoming and Dodge City, Kansas could cross the Brooklyn Bridge?
What if we all had the chance to make a lifelong friend from a faraway place?
What if American adulthood began with an adventure that brought us all closer together?
The American Exchange Project. We send high school seniors in the summer after graduation on a free, week-long trip to an American town radically different from their own.
Our travelers see with open-hearted host families, soak up local culture, volunteer, and come to love a new community and the people who call it home.
We're connecting a country,
one student,
one high school,
one hometown at a time.
Come travel with us.
That's beautiful.
If I could just, I do want to make one, which is that it's not all fun and games on these trips. So we work every year with a renowned mediator. The guy they called in, his name's Adar Cohen, to broker the contract of the Good Friday Agreement between Protestants and Catholics. He worked with police officers and gang leaders in New York at the height of the violence there. We bring all of our educators together for a weekend every year and train them on how to facilitate the conversation that comes up about the Confederate flag in the back row of the van when they drive by one while going through a town, how to introduce topics that are bubbling between groups. We had a group crying because the public school they were touring was so nice compared to what they had. But how do you navigate these moments? Sometimes the answer is do nothing. Sometimes it handles you insert yourself in a heavy way. So when you're gathered around the campfire or when these things pop up, we're training educators at the same time to learn how to navigate these really tough topics so they can be moments that build strength and unity among groups and not end up in division.
Can I say, I'm so struck by both of your projects, the liberation, maybe is not the right word, that comes from being outside of one's own context, which is really interesting. To think then about how they return to their own context, having had these kind of freeing experiences of talking more openly to someone because they don't know them, right? Because they don't have a history with them, or they don't have to go back to class with them the next day or whatever it is. And I'm wondering about how we translate some of that back to their home environments. And I'm thinking again about the classroom. How do we create that same environment in a classroom of students being able to be free and comfortable with someone who's, they're gonna know all semester long, or who's, down the hall in the dormitory, who is a stranger to begin with, but quickly becomes something else, a surveillance community in some ways, right? Who can catch them up on something or can out them if they say something wrong. How do we kind of move those lessons into these other spaces?
Can I just answer that? I mean, I think there's some very easy things that we need to start to incorporate into our vocabulary. And one is, I think I heard you say this, Sarah. Did I get that right? I mean, just simple things that we can start to do. It doesn't take, you know, sometimes we can do great trips or we can have these encounters that we create online. But how do you start to work that muscle?
Yeah, and curiosity is key too. One thing we tell all, there are great questions you can ask. Governor, you've brought a few up at the NGA, but one is, what do people get wrong about you?
Yeah.
How do you throw that one around? I mean, if I were to wish one thing for teenagers today, it would be to remove this enormous pressure they all feel. I mean, pressures to succeed, the odds of you going to college if you want to do that, but also the pressure to say the right thing online, to not get in trouble. I don't think kids feel free to be a kid today as much as they should. And we need to find ways to reintroduce that, you're right, into the institutions they're involved in every day, not just in brief.
Yeah, and I think I love some of the research that we've done and followed with this NGA initiative. It really, we talk about those skills, learning those skills from a very young age. I mean, we're talking kindergarten. If we can start to introduce and teach these skills, just like you would, you know, you teach multiplication or addition or, you know, all these other things that we teach, that has to be, in my view, part of the curriculum, part of just how we teach kids, what they're seeing. You mentioned, Sarah, online that, you know, and many of us have been talking about this, the terrible behavior that's being modeled for them from the time, because this is a digital generation where they are seeing this day in and day out.
And you can never, I mean, in 2016, this year's high school seniors were 9 and 10 years old.
Yeah.
This is all they've ever known.
Yep.
And while we adults are having to navigate this environment, they've grown up in it. We remember a different time. They don't. That's enormous. I also think we need to that point, we need to do a much better job of cultivating diverse communities, and I mean diverse in every way. I grew up playing baseball with kids from all walks of life. I also in Hawaii, an island with no racial majority. Being different, having different ideas about the world wasn't that big a deal.
Yeah.
It was just kind of what was, and our communities are becoming more and more socioeconomically and politically homogeneous. So.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. So I think, let's see, we have like, I think 5 minutes. So I would love to open it up to questions. We have an incredible panel, as you can see, with a wealth of knowledge. So I'd love to open it up to any questions that you may have from the audience. Yeah, David. Oh, she's coming with the microphone. I know, I was gonna say, you're this close too. You could probably just holler.
Just thank you so much to all of you for your work. Just extraordinary work, and it's so heartening to hear more about it and just have a restoration of faith in not only the work you're doing, but the following behind it and people who are participating. So just thank you. David, question for you. Twofold. One, is there a rubric of differences that you evaluate when you're determining what constitutes polar opposite towns beyond politics? And in addition to that, when you're sending a student on one of these trips, is there any prep work you do with the student in terms of, you know, questions to ask or ways in which they can be a little bit more inquisitive to get more out of the experience?
Yeah, I mean, happily, we live in an enormous and massively diverse country. I mean, we could all get on a bus and go 2 hours that way and be in a different world. So, and on top of that too, the nature of our political climate now is, in my view, so interrelated with class and culture that, you know, one can find many areas of difference just picking the right town. We do have a kind of rudimentary placement algorithm sorting hat, which I often have to rewrite because tech often goes that way.
So the Hufflepuffs go with the Gryffindors.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But you know, the reality is there is no perfect place to send any kid, and there's a lot of options for every student. We also talk about, you know, all different types of diversity in the program, because many kids, politically speaking, don't really have their minds made up yet, or they're just kind of regurgitating what they hear around the house. So We look at a number of factors that we don't have all the time to get into it now, but really where we place them is a function of a number of different ideas. And I noticed today with kids, class, frankly, is much the more stark line of division than politics. And then in terms of a rubric, initially we did, and we found that it didn't do much. We thought that the best thing we can do is to make this a wonderful coming of age experience. You know, we say that senior exchange ought to be as normal to the high school experience as the prom, and we try to frame it up as a graduation gift that we give to every high school student week in another town for free. I mean, it's free. I often look at the idea of a playground. You know, it's a site that kids rush to on their own, play freely, but there's a real design there. There's an imagination there, and kids are never going to fall off an object too high onto an object that's too sharp. So we do a lot of prep work with our teachers, and we do a lot of Zooming in before so they can meet their host families and meet one another. We also have AEP Day, that's the video you saw, so every kid goes into their teacher's classroom, there's a little bag with their name on it, they open a letter and, you know, congratulations, Dana, we'd like to offer you a trip to Muskogee, Oklahoma. Oh my God, we're going to Muskogee. And because you're going, oh my God, we're going to Muskogee, you're not going, where, what's this? And every kid in the class is going crazy, and there are cupcakes and balloons and confetti and all that. And so there's a lot of quiet things in the program design that prep the kids so that they're really just buzzing on the way that they get there. And then by the time they're there, the most important thing that happens is they're so nervous that the first thing they do is we send them home after a long day of travel to a host family. This is the biggest thing we do. And to have doors open, and mom away from mom and dad away from dad are there welcoming you with a smile and a hug and a sign that says, you know, Dana, welcome to Muskogee, Oklahoma, and here's your dinner, and there's your bed, and it was our daughter's bed, and it's folded, and there are your shower towels there. And suddenly you're at home in a foreign place, and that person becomes Oklahoma mom. That, I think, is the way we think of preparation on this.
I do have one other question. I've been grappling with this idea of kids, I feel unsafe. And the difference between unsafe and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think we're conflating, I think a lot of kids are conflating the two. We've got to get, so talk maybe a little bit, like getting uncomfortable is kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But lots of times that's interpreted as unsafe. Talk a little bit, anybody could address that.
I can just quickly address that. You know, when professors register their class, they ask that question. What will you do to make this safe? And we're like, well, they're on Zoom, and we don't exchange their information. So we keep privacy. However, we always have a live team of supporters available in case anything happens. In the time we've done it, we've never had an abusive encounter or any kind of those encounters. People say, well, I can't hear my partner, I can't see my partner, but there's nothing that makes them safe. I love that. It's uncomfortable, not unsafe.
Like the first thing a kid does when they're uncomfortable in our program is they pull up this guy.
Yeah.
And this is kind of it's like an umbilical cord back to their world of familiarity that they can totally control. And I think for a lot of kids too, they're uncomfortable because one, it's a different environment, but two, it's an environment that they're gonna have to put themselves forward and they're gonna have to try. And I think evident in a lot of the teenagers I see is this attitude of if I don't really try, if I don't really put myself out there, I can't really fail. And so their orientation is not toward getting the most out of a situation, it's getting basically what I need to get by.
Yeah, I think we really do need, I think you are putting your finger on a real problem we have, and that is the conflating of kind of physical safety, which of course we must protect, you know, beyond anything else maybe, and intellectual safety. I think intellectual safety is not good for most people and most students. I think discomfort is how we learn. I think being jostled out of your own ideas and your own sureness and your own comfort levels is really the first moment of opening to new ideas and being able to hear others. And so I think we actually want not only discomfort, we want to make sure students understand that discomfort is part of the point. And you know, again, I think we're talking about students, but I think we have ourselves and the way we talk about safety and comfort, you know, to blame for a lot of this, you know, and I think again, the sort of larger public world is not showing students that it's okay to be uncomfortable, right? You have to be right, you have to be absolutely right, you have to be firm and unyielding in your opinions, and otherwise you are weak, and that is absolutely, that is a barrier to any kind of education, any kind of learning.
Thank you. I think we're out of time, but we're so grateful to each of our panelists and for the incredible work you're doing in all your areas. So please let us know how we can help. Thank you.